Bitcoin has gone up in price. It's up nearly 5% overnight. What on earth is going on? Is it too late to buy Bitcoin? Yes, obviously we know it's going up, but let's just cross our fingers for a little bit more of a dip. Maybe we'll get it, maybe not. I don't know. But in this video, I'm going to go through 30 to 40 different facts, reasons why Bitcoin right now at $71,000 may not be expensive. It actually may be very, very cheap. And if you're hoping, if you're crossing your fingers magically that we're going to have some sort of big price dip back to 40K, 50K, maybe even 60K at this point, I think that you are probably betting against the market. So, without further ado, let's get into looking at these facts I have here, talking about a long-term Bitcoin future of potentially millions and millions of dollars. So, this is what we're looking at right here. This is the price of Bitcoin. As you have probably noticed, Bitcoin has risen from $67,000 all the way up now to 71, nearly $72,000. If we look at the whole year, we see a very interesting trend where we had a very dramatic late 2023, right? Between end of January and beginning or mid-March, we skyrocketed from 39,000 all the way up to $41,000. I remember a lot of people that were on the sidelines in January and December over here, right? They were like, "Oh, Luke, I can't believe we're at 42,000. That's so expensive. I'm going to hold 50% of my portfolio that I want to buy to Bitcoin in cash and wait for it to go back down to 30,000. Just a little dip, just a little dip. That's all I'm waiting for. Just a little dip." Okay. We go back over the last few years. I remember when we were over here in the very bottom of the market, $16,000, $19,000, $20,000, $21,000. And people were saying, "Look, I want to buy Bitcoin, but I'm going to wait for $12,000. I'm going to wait. It's all good. I'm a maxi. I get it. I understand. I understand the dollar's trending down. I get it. I get it. But I'm going to wait for 12,000. Okay. And they are still sitting on the sidelines, possibly. I don't know. I don't hear from them that much. But over here, same thing. When we hit $30,000 in April of 2023, I remember people saying, "Oh my goodness, we have doubled. We've doubled from 15, 16, $17,000 here at the bottom all the way up to 30 grand in 4 months. We've doubled in price. No way this is sustainable. We're going to have a big recession. Rates are going to destroy the world, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to hold cash," right? And then over here, like I said before, at 42,000, I heard the same thing. And I'm hearing the same thing here today, right? People are saying, "Oh, we're going to get one more dip," right? We've been consolidating for 6 months. We're going to buy again when it goes back down to $54,000 or $60,000 or $57,000 or 58, right? Oh, 71,000. I can't justify buying it with a big seven in the front here. Oh, that seven, it's so painful. I want that to go back down to a five or a four or a six even, right? Oh, 71,000. Okay. My point is, maybe you'll get it. Maybe there'll be the big crash. Maybe there will be a recession. But do not time the market is my strong encouragement. Number one, because you're probably going to make less money than you think, right? You're probably going to make less money than you think. We're at $71,000 right now. Even if we crash down to $60,000, you're making maybe 10, 15, maybe 20% on your money if you're likely. But the bigger problem is the intangible cost. How many hours are you going to be anxious about that? How many hours are you going to spend wondering about which price should you buy? Which price should you set your limit orders at, right? How many hours are you going to be spending worrying about that? And those hours you could have instead gone back out and made more money in the process, right? So this is why I don't think about it. This is why I only spot buy and limit buy. However, I have not been buying heavily right now because I don't have that much cash. But all that to say is that if you're holding a lot of cash on the sidelines, waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, this train is probably going to leave the station without you. And so I'm going to go through a few reasons why, okay? The same thing is true with all of the Bitcoin proxies as well, right? Obviously, Bitcoin is up about 2 to 5 or 2 to 3% in the last few days. MicroStrategy stock obviously is everyone's favorite Bitcoin proxy. It's up 51% in the last month. And you might say, "Oh, that's not sustainable." But if you zoom out, this will load for me. I remember, okay, and this is a true story. Okay, I remember in late 2023 feeling late to MicroStrategy when it was $60, okay? Because I said, "Oh man, I feel too late. It's already doubled." Okay, this is where I felt too late to MicroStrategy, okay? In October, October over here in 2023, right? $50 a share. because I was annoyed I didn't buy it at 31 bucks a share. But you know what I did? I was an adult. I swallowed my pride. I took a bite of humble pie and I bought it anyway because I believed in the thesis and because I'm not a day trader. Okay. And I was perfectly fine with that. I was perfectly comfortable with that. I could have stressed and worried, but waiting for it to get back to $30. But you know what? It never did. And probably it is never going to go back down there again, unless we have some sort of dramatic black swan event, right? If I had waited to buy it 30 bucks, now that it had gone to high 40s, low 50s, it would have never come back, and I would have been staring at it at nearly over 5x what it was since then, right? And so obviously you want to buy at the bottoms, but my encouragement is, and this is true with things that go up and go down, right? Just because a stock or any asset has gone down does not mean it is inherently a good buy. Okay. A company can fall 50% in value and you buy it because you think it's a good buy because it's gone down, but then it can go down another 50%. And the same thing is true with the inverse. Just because MicroStrategy or Bitcoin goes up does not mean that it's inherently a good sell or that it's inherently a good time to wait on the sidelines. Okay. It could totally go up more. My point is either in the down or in the up, you got to keep in mind, where is it going? That is the only question. It doesn't matter what it's done the last week, the last month, the last year, the last 10 years. What matters is where it's going. So let's look at a few dozen facts I have here about where it could potentially be going. Okay. And my encouragement here is not for you to go all in or do something risky or stupid. My encouragement here is to get off zero when it comes to your Bitcoin allocation. So this is a thread I posted literally days ago. Bitcoin's already up 10% since I posted this. But I asked questions in this thread to prompt thinking about Bitcoin in tens of millions of dollars a coin. $58 million is the number I'll be talking about specifically here. But the larger picture is not a specific price prediction. I've got no idea if it's going to hit 58 million, when it's going to hit 58 million, right? My point is with this larger thread that your unit bias, your anchoring bias for Bitcoin should be in the 7 and 8 figures, not in the 5 figures. Okay. And 6 figures is a rounding error. From 100 grand to $1 million is a rounding error. So we're going to go through some amazing facts. I'm going to ask some big questions and we're going to talk about Bitcoin as a kind of chess. Okay. Fact number 1, Bitcoin is only 0.1% of global assets. I know everybody talks about Bitcoin. I know it's new, cool, sexy thing, whatever, but it is still only 1/1000th of the world's money. Now, this is interesting because way less than 1 in 1,000 people actually are using Bitcoin, talking about Bitcoin, and save their economic purchasing power in Bitcoin, right? But yet still, even with a lower percentage of people adopting it, there was a greater amount of market value as a result of that, right? Which we'll get to that more in a second. But the point of bringing it up is saying Bitcoin is much less like a company. You probably shouldn't compare Bitcoin to a company. You should probably compare it to a commodity. That's the point I'm making there, right? So Bitcoin is barely 1/1000th of global assets. Okay, now let's talk about some companies. Okay, over here, Microsoft. Okay, the world's largest company, depending on who you ask, at least in the top 3. Microsoft is voting on a quote unquote assessment of investing in Bitcoin in December 10th. Okay. It is pretty ridiculous. I am very surprised by that. They have explicitly quoted MicroStrategy. They have explicitly said they want to buy Bitcoin, or they at least want to consider buying Bitcoin, to be correct. Okay, Tesla, one of the Magnificent Seven, right? The 10th largest company, already owns thousands of Bitcoin, right? As you probably know, Mr. Elon Musk, CEO and co-founder, I suppose, of Tesla, has made it very clear that he is Bitcoin agnostic. He is Bitcoin adjacent. He doesn't fully understand it. He doesn't really like talking about it. Whenever he is asked about it, he explicitly refuses to talk about it. I just don't think it's his main focus, but he has taken some percentage of Tesla's balance sheet and acquired Bitcoin with it, as you know. MicroStrategy, as you know, obviously already owns hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin, and it is very likely to be included into the S&P 500 next year. Okay, right now, most people that own the stock market don't really care about Bitcoin. Why don't they care about it? Because they don't have any price exposure. Okay, it's just a number on a screen for something that they don't they don't care about it, right? They don't even have $100 in the thing, so why are they going to care about if it goes up or down? Well, when MicroStrategy gets included in the S&P 500, they're going to realize, oh my goodness, Square, Block, Tesla, MicroStrategy, they're going to realize, oh hey, if I have $100,000 in the S&P 500, I actually have an $80 price exposure to Bitcoin proxies. Oh, hey, if I'm a multimillionaire in the US stock market with my little 60/40 portfolio, I have like, 0.3% of an exposure to Bitcoin or something like that, right? Whatever it is, my point is the fastest way to get more people asking questions about Bitcoin is to slowly Trojan horse them with some sort of Bitcoin proxy to the price to get them to care about it, right? I think that is something that is probably underrated, that we're going to have literally tens of millions of Americans are going to have significant Bitcoin price exposure within the next 12 months, right? Where they're going to get their first 0.1%, fifth of a percent, third of a percent price exposure to Bitcoin. Okay. Like the majority of Americans are still quote unquote on zero when it comes to Bitcoin price exposure. Okay. The majority of Americans are going to have technically Bitcoin price exposure next year, right? Obviously, they currently do if they own Tesla, right? Tesla's in the S&P 500, but comparing that to MicroStrategy being included, it's not even a question. MicroStrategy has dozens of multiples more Bitcoin than Tesla, okay? So that's something I think is very important that people may not be fully considering, okay? Now, obviously, we have the ETF companies, BlackRock, Fidelity, ARK, Morgan Stanley, and numerous other mega fund companies and ETF holders that are actively pursuing Bitcoin for clients. Morgan Stanley was the most recent one in this list, and there's many others as well. Bank of America and others are either trying to get exposure to Bitcoin directly or MicroStrategy as a proxy for Bitcoin, or they're recommending to clients to get off zero when it comes to Bitcoin exposure. Now, Michael Dell of Dell, right? Dell. Tim Cook, of course, CEO of Apple, the current CEO of Apple, Jeff Bezos, former CEO of Amazon, all three of them have explicitly expressed interest in acquiring Bitcoin. And so I think that's a question to keep in mind. We know Jeff Bezos, Tim Cook, and Michael Dell all have an interest in Bitcoin. Michael Dell's been tweeting about Bitcoin like basically nonstop for 4 months. Jeff Bezos has met with Michael Saylor multiple times. And Tim Cook has said that he owns Bitcoin and he is considering buying more. My point is, all these people are looking at buying Bitcoin. Now, I don't want to say this time is different. I don't want to say Bitcoin's going to the moon. I don't want to say Bitcoin's just going to just keep going up and up and up and up. But when you have Microsoft considering looking at this, and you have these other CEOs and major influential tech leaders in other companies of the Magnificent Seven, okay, we have to seriously consider that the majority of the Magnificent Seven, the majority, right? And I even forgot to include Mark Zuckerberg on this list, right? Mark Zuckerberg, probably more than anyone else on this list, Dell, Bezos, or Cook, right? Mark Zuckerberg is probably more into Bitcoin than any of the other three, and he actually probably has the ability more than anyone else on that list to acquire Bitcoin within his company, Meta, right? So we could be looking at the majority of the Magnificent Seven within a year having a non-zero allocation to Bitcoin as a treasury reserve asset. Maybe that's a 10% allocation. Maybe that's a 1/10 of 1% allocation. Okay, it's probably more the latter than the former. But my point is, this is a massive narrative shift, and it's going to get a lot of people looking, a lot of people thinking. And so if you're trying to wait, if you're trying to sit on the sidelines, waiting for 65K or waiting for 59K, that may not be the wisest idea. That may not be the best idea, right? These companies are larger than countries. They have larger balance sheets than dozens and dozens of countries in the world, okay? It's critical to keep this in mind, right? Now, let's keep some other facts in mind. Social Security will be insolvent, or at least begin to be insolvent by 2033, okay? Michigan, my wonderful little home state, our pension fund has bought Bitcoin. Yes, it's a small allocation, yet they have bought Bitcoin. Likewise, Wisconsin, second state, or actually they were the first, Michigan was the second, but Michigan and Wisconsin, the two lakes with Lake Michigan in the middle of them, they also bought Bitcoin and their pension fund, okay? There are another 48 states in America yet to buy Bitcoin to their pension funds, okay? And the allocation for Michigan and Wisconsin could increase by a factor of 20, a factor of 50, a factor of 100, with still having a single-digit percentage exposure to Bitcoin. That's something to keep in mind. Okay, half a dozen countries now own Bitcoin, and Bhutan is leading the way in the world in sats per capita. They have had a mining operation for years. They kept it secret. They did not reveal it for years until more recently. And so I wonder how many other countries like Bhutan are currently mining Bitcoin, are currently having an interest in Bitcoin, and not making it public knowledge, right? This is something we know that happened with Bhutan. They were actively not talking about it, and now they are, literally leading the way. They have the most Bitcoin on their country's balance sheet per citizen. Oh, but Bhutan's a small country. Oh, but El Salvador's a small country. Yeah, okay, well, the larger companies, not companies, countries will eventually follow suit, right? As we all know, or as you probably know, the Saudis have backed away from the dollar earlier this year in 2024, and all of the BRICS countries, right, which would be Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, and China. China, obviously. So that's a lot of very large countries. Brazil is the largest country in South America. Russia, obviously, it's Russia. It's a massive military power. China, obviously, they have 1.3 billion people. India has 1.4 billion people. South Africa has a major percentage of the world's gold reserves, right? My point is, all those countries are intentionally diversifying away from the US dollar. And so, do I think that the BRICS currency is going to survive long term? No, it probably won't, but it's something to keep in mind. What if the BRICS currency, if they're trying to have some sort of basket to back their own competition with the dollar, what if they decide to have Bitcoin as some exposure to that, right? Maybe their BRICS currency, they want it backed by gold and oil or something like that, but then they also include some percentage exposure to Bitcoin. I think that's entirely possible. Why? Because Vladimir Putin himself has floated the idea publicly that maybe someday they will use Bitcoin as the unit of account and the medium of exchange and transfer for oil, right? Because at least Bitcoin takes energy to produce when the dollar doesn't, right? So that's something else to keep in mind, that we have that as a discussion. And again, my point with saying all these things is I'm not saying all of the stars are going to align in the next 18 months and we're going to go to the mega moon. No, I'm just saying that there's so many factors in play here. Even if we just have a handful of these all align, that is massive, massive catalyst that we've not seen yet for Bitcoin. Now, let's get a little bit of political here because we are in an election in the United States, if you didn't notice. Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, Elon Musk, Robert Kennedy, Vivek, JD, all of them are active major American political figures this year, whether you like them or not, and they all are attempting to embrace Bitcoin to varying degrees of success, okay? I have my own opinions of who's more successful and less successful, but all of these people are major political voices this election cycle, and all of them are actively being pro-Bitcoin, adjacent Bitcoin, right? And these people have massive sways. Okay, Donald Trump is, in my opinion, the most famous person in the world right now for obvious reasons, right? He's been basically the most famous person for the last decade, right? Elon Musk, if it's not Donald, it's probably Elon, right? These voices being pro-Bitcoin or adjacent Bitcoin is something really keep in mind. And right now, according to betting markets, there's a 65 to 70 or so percent chance that Trump's going to win. So if you believe the betting markets and you think it's more probable than not that Donald Trump's going to win, then you have to keep in mind we literally have for the next 5 years Bitcoin adjacent politicians in the White House and the executive branch in America. Does that mean anything good is going to happen? I don't know, maybe not. But it is something to keep in mind because, especially of the whole idea of having Bitcoin as a treasury reserve asset, it is not necessarily going to be guaranteed. I'm not putting my hope in that, but it's something to think about. Okay, not only in the US, but around the world, other countries are looking to do the same thing. Norway has been buying MicroStrategy shares like there is no tomorrow. Their central bank, okay, their central bank has been buying MicroStrategy because they want Bitcoin exposure. That's like a big deal, okay? El Salvador does not have a central bank in the same way that Norway has a central bank, right? Suriname is looking to acquire Bitcoin. Guatemala has politicians that are pro-Bitcoin. Colombia has had meetings with Bitcoin figures, as well as Germany. I don't know how on earth I forgot Germany in this list, but Germany was meeting with Sam Samao, Adam Back, and a few other Bitcoiners from the company Jan3 to talk about Bitcoin, right? And a handful of other countries, other than the ones I mentioned, are either discussing Bitcoin or attempting to get exposure to Bitcoin at the sovereign level, akin to El Salvador. Who do I suspect is the most likely to be next? Probably Suriname, but that's just an opinion. Now, back in the US, Pennsylvania, Ohio, North Carolina, Wyoming, and multiple other states have either passed legislation or are currently attempting to pass pro-Bitcoin legislation. That's a really big deal, okay? I know these things may not seem like they're big deals. I know these things may not seem like they have massive catalysts in price, but keep in mind, it's all these factors combining together again, okay? Do you remember this many things happening at once, all the way back in the bear market in late 2022 and early 2023? No, there were not. Yes, there were reasons to be optimistic. Most importantly, the fact that the casino that was FTX had already collapsed and that paper was gone, going back into the system. But the reality is these factors are combining together right now as a result of regulatory clarity throughout 2024, and then probably only going to get more and more clear in 2025. One thing I forgot to include on this list is that many of the FTX creditors that were scammed out of their money, I never had a dollar in FTX because I knew it was a scam, or at least it was not sustainable. I was surprised how early it collapsed, but nonetheless, it did collapse. But they're getting over $10 billion, I think it's $16 billion back of their funds that were lost, right? And what percentage of that 16 billion is going to go back into Bitcoin? Probably at least some major percentage, maybe 10%, 20%, 30%. I don't know. But my point is that it's just yet another factor. That is tens of thousands, if not maybe hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin that are going to be sucked off the market just from the FTX creditors getting their billions of dollars back, right? Obviously, this is an encouragement to take self-custody and get off the exchanges, because if you were caught on one of these exchanges, like FTX, then you get rug pulled, you lose your money, and now they're getting their fiat denominated funds back. But Bitcoin has tripled or quadrupled in that time. So even though they're getting, some major percentage of their funds back, maybe half of their funds back, when you factor in the price of Bitcoin going up in the process, really they're only getting like 10 or 15% of their funds back. So just another encouragement to get off exchanges. Now, let's go back to our list of facts here. The dominant stock market index in America is the S&P 500. There is no second best stock index. The index has increased in price by a factor of 10 in the last 16 years, despite being flat when adjusted for CPI and M2 expansion. Okay, stocks are only going up in nominal terms, and they are in a bubble, and that bubble must continue to grow. I do not believe we're going to have a major stock market crash. Now, maybe we will, and I'm going to eat my words with that, but I don't think we will. I think we just have to keep expanding the multiples, keep expanding the valuations, keep the numbers going up, right? If we look back, okay, and look this up on your own. If you look at the S&P 500, the price of the S&P 500, and the low of the great financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, you see that the stock market has literally gone up by a factor of 10 within these last 15 years or so, okay? And most people have not sat with themselves and actually thought about that for more than 2 minutes. Is that sustainable? Is a 10x every decade and a half sustainable for the global economy? Why does the stock market go up? Oh, it's the global economy. Why does the stock market have such a high return? Oh, because it's stable, because it's the lowest risk, right? None of these things are true. The stock market index is not the economy, quote unquote. The stock market index is representing a devaluation and debasement in the political currency of the world, right? The stock market is buying a share of the cash flows of the world. So yes, you are buying the economy, but more accurately, you're buying a share of cash flows of the 500 largest American corporations. And as the debasement of those cash, of that unit of account goes down, then the price, the nominal price of those cash flows skyrocket. And also, if you're factoring on top of that, expanding multiples and valuations and expanding, debt markets, then that's where you get an even greater amount of appreciation, right? So if you took the American stock market, the S&P 500, and you divided it based on CPI, Consumer Price Index, or consumer price, inflation, if you divide it based on that, it's actually flat, more or less, since the Great Financial Crisis. We've not recovered in real purchasing power terms since the Great Financial Crisis. The reason things feel like they're getting cheaper if you own the stock market is because the appreciation of the stock market in nominal terms is faster than many technological sectors, right? Many things in the economy are getting cheaper, right? In particular, technology. Other things are not getting cheaper, like healthcare and like education. Those things are not getting cheaper in price in terms of the stock market, right? And so my point of bringing this up, why does it have to do with Bitcoin? My point is that if you think, oh, we have a long way to go, oh, blah, 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 the reality is that we already are this detached from reality, right? Like at some point, the central bank of the United States has said they would consider buying stocks and adding it to the balance sheet of the U.S. Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, in order to prop up the stock market. And a lot of people say, oh, that will never happen. That's far away. They were talking about that years ago. I'm not so sure. The stock market's up by a factor of 10. We need the stock market to stay up, because if it falls, if it crashes, if all the doomsdayers are right and we have some sort of big recession, a big crash, the reality is tax receipts go down, and we desperately need those tax receipts here in America. We cannot allow property prices to fall. We cannot allow stock prices to fall. If those fall, then tax receipts fall. If tax receipts fall, the deficit explodes. If the deficit explodes, that is a threat to the bond market. If there's a threat to the bond market, that's a threat to the dollar. We cannot let house prices fall over a sustained period of time. We cannot let the stock market fall over a sustained period of time. We can only let this fall insofar that it's not a threat to the system. But as this grows and becomes a larger and larger and larger part of the system, every single small downtrend becomes a greater threat to the system, right? So this is my point. There's a non-zero chance, in my opinion, in the next 1, 5, 10 years, we see the central banks, in particular America's central bank, begin buying stocks in order to boost their balance sheet and keep up prices. And I think the same thing eventually will be true with Bitcoin. Now, back to politicians. I know, election season. Donald Trump and Robert Kennedy have both on stage described as promised policy a desire for a national strategic reserve for Bitcoin. Okay, I'm focusing especially on Kennedy here. Kennedy has expressed desire for a 4 million Bitcoin stockpile. Okay, for those of you counting at home, that's correct. There are not 4 million Bitcoin left. Okay, 95.3% of all Bitcoin have been mined. There are not 4 million Bitcoin left to be mined. And likewise, there are not 4 million Bitcoin left to be on exchanges. And so some people would say, oh, Luke, he's not going to buy 4 million Bitcoin. He couldn't even if he tried, blah, blah, blah. Yes, of course. Obviously, you're correct. He can't buy 4 million Bitcoin until there are willing sellers to sell Bitcoin back. So what does that mean? That means when you have an inelastic supply for an asset, the only elastic measure is the price of each unit of that asset. That is the point. That is my point in making. Do I think Kennedy is going to be, anointed as czar for the Bitcoin treasury strategy by Donald Trump if he wins? No, I don't think so, right? And obviously, it's impossible to know the future. But it's important to keep in mind, there's a 65-70% chance at the time of recording that Donald Trump's going to win the election within a week here, okay? So the majority chance is that Donald Trump wins. Now, of course, Donald Trump could lie. Of course, Donald Trump could deceive his voters and not include Kennedy in his cabinet or in his inner circle. Of course, he could do that. However, if we assume there's at least a 51% chance he doesn't do that and he does include Kennedy to some extent, then the question is, to what degree is Robert Kennedy going to be in Trump's ear telling him to buy Bitcoin or telling him to increase the national strategic stockpile of Bitcoin? Trump's already claiming he's going to get off zero by claiming he wants America to stockpile the low and mid six-figure coin amount, right? The hundreds of thousands of coins that America has confiscated over the years, right? My point is that we don't know the future, and I'm not saying X is going to happen by Y date. I'm saying we should think in probabilities, and we are actually at the point right now where it is more probable in the next 5 years that we have a national strategic stockpile for America than less likely, right? Probability for the first time is in our favor. Every year, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, all of those years, it was way less likely, way less probable that the United States was going to adopt Bitcoin to some degree as a national strategic stockpile asset, just like we have with gold, just like we have with oil, right? Every other year until this year, 2024, it has been less likely for that to happen. Now, right now, for the first time in American history, obviously, in the first time in Bitcoin's history, is it more likely, over 51%, that this is going to happen within the foreseeable future than less likely, right? We actually have a path for the first time, okay? And this is not me blindly saying, oh, you should, love the politicians I love. This is not me blindly saying, oh, you should blindly trust the politicians. Oh, this, blah, blah. That's not what I'm saying. Again, think in terms of probabilities. There's a 70% chance Trump's going to win. There's at least a 51% chance that Trump's going to honor his promise and include Kennedy in his administration. And probably there's at least a 51% chance within that Kennedy is going to, talk Trump's ear off about getting some Bitcoin exposure, especially if we have a mega Bitcoin bull market in the process where Bitcoin is all anything can ever talk about, right? If we see in a couple of years, Microsoft has indeed bought Bitcoin, that Tesla has indeed bought more Bitcoin, that some other mega, Magnificent Seven megacorp, whether it's Meta or Amazon or whatever, like if we see those things happening, I think the probability of America buying Bitcoin for the sake of its national strategic stockpile are going to go up, right? Think in terms of probabilities, and the probabilities are rapidly shifting in our favor. They have shifted a huge amount in the last year, probably increased by a factor of 10, but yet most people are still neglecting it and still ignoring it because the probability is not high enough yet to be obvious to everyone. So let's get back to the list here. List. Okay, so 4 million Bitcoin stockpile. I've talked about that. Okay, Bitcoin now uses over 0.5% of the world's electricity and now more energy than the US Navy. Okay, less than 4 million people own a non-dust amount of Bitcoin. Got to keep that in mind. Okay, 4 million people. Oh, that's a lot of people. Actually, no, it's not. 4 million addresses. How do we know this? 4 million addresses have at least a tenth of a Bitcoin. In reality, most people in Bitcoin have multiple addresses. The average is roughly 30 or 35. Depending on, other on-chain analysis, much smarter than me, have calculated it's about 30 average addresses per Bitcoin on-chain user. That sounds about right to me. So 4 million people have at least a tenth of a Bitcoin self-custody. That means if you own 1/10 of a Bitcoin in self-custody, you are at minimum in the top 4 million people in the world with Bitcoin stacking. Congratulations, pat yourself on the back. That is a wonderful achievement. In reality, you're probably more like the top 2 million. Okay. Now, top 2 million out of 5.36 billion adults, that is a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage, right? And so again, we're talking about 1 in 3,000, 1 in 5,000, 1 in 10,000 people, a tiny, minuscule percentage of the world that has adopted Bitcoin. And yet we're already 1/1000th of the world's assets, right? My point is, when you have a million users in the internet, a million users in the internet create a much more valuable network than a million users in the newspaper system, right? And likewise, a couple million users in Bitcoin has already created an asset worth way more than those couple million users in the traditional banking system or fiat rails, right? This is my point. 4 million people, less than 4 million people own a non-dust amount of Bitcoin, right? Obviously, a lot of people own a few million sats, a few $100 of Bitcoin, but in my opinion, those aren't people that to the same degree are understanding or using Bitcoin as a means of account, right? And I'm not casting any disrespect on people that are less fortunate and can't afford to buy more. I'm just saying the reality is there are 70 million millionaires or 330 million companies, and yet we're looking at 4 million, probably more like 1.5 to 2 million people that own a non-dust amount of Bitcoin, okay? Obviously, the war in the Middle East between, Israel and terrorists and people involved, obviously, it's a very touchy subject, but the point of me bringing this up here is that one of the major pieces of fear, uncertainty, and doubt against Bitcoin is that, oh, Bitcoin's used for terrorists. Oh, Bitcoin's for the money launderers. Oh, it's horrible. We got to censor. Okay, the reality is Hamas, terrorist organization, has repeatedly asked for donations to them. I know, I can't believe it. They accept donations. They've asked for donations to them to be sent in political fiat currency instead of Bitcoin, due to the fact Bitcoin is not the ideal currency for terrorists and criminals, right? Obviously, this second part is an opinion that I have stated based on the fact, which is here, right? Hamas has repeatedly refused to accept donations in Bitcoin. That is something to seriously think about. Oh, Bitcoin's good for terrorists, besides the fact that the terrorists don't want it, right? Something to think about. Now, a lot of people would say, oh, well, Bitcoin uses 0.5% of the world's electricity. Surely Bitcoin can't use that much more electricity in the future. And surely this is horrible for the planet and boiling the oceans, right? Actually, the inverse has happened this year in 2024, thanks to my friend Daniel Batten and many other people working in Bitcoin tirelessly to get ESG funds interested in Bitcoin. This is what has come out this year. According to the IPCC, the fastest way to mitigate the negative consequences and externalities of quote unquote climate change is to reduce methane emissions. Now, I'm not going to get into a whole debate here about if climate change this or blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm not being a doomsdayer here, right? I don't think the world's going to blow up in 12 years if we, have certain kinds of pollution. But I think, obviously, humans, we should mitigate our pollution, right? I'm very vocal about this, right? We should mitigate our plastic pollution, our lead pollution, all kinds of pollution, including probably methane pollution, right? And so even if you are a climate doomsdayer, even if you think the world is going to end in 12 years and everyone's going to die or whatever, right? Even if you think that, the IPCC itself has described the number one factor tool we have in our control to mitigate quote unquote climate change is to reduce methane emissions. Methane is over 80 times more warming for the planet than carbon. So it's very strange to me that the politicians like to talk about carbon, and nobody talks about methane. But anyway, I digress. The point is the highest ranking pollutant of methane is from landfills. Okay, landfills are the number one contributor to methane emissions in the world. And the IPCC itself has described Bitcoin mining along with solar farming as being the two most quote unquote climate friendly technologies available today. Okay, and why is this important? This is important because it massively shifts the narrative. Oh, Bitcoin's bad for the planet. It's going to boil the oceans. It's going to kill everybody, blah, blah, blah. No, actually, it's the inverse of that. Bitcoin mining can have a profitable means of turning methane into less destructive or less warming kinds of emissions like carbon in places that otherwise are not monetizable, like landfills, which are the number one contributor to methane, right? And now, how big is that market? Well, there are currently $60 trillion of investments in ESG funds to begin allocating towards Bitcoin, okay? Bitcoin uniquely has the ability to enable renewable energy sources, right? I have seen this myself, right? Where I work at Blockware, we have Bitcoin mining facilities in 4 different states here in America. Wherever we go and set up a new mining facility, electricity costs for the local town go down because we're stabilizing the grid. We bring new jobs back to the region, and we are reusing slash recycling old energy infrastructure that we used to use for other things, right? We are turning old coal plants into new Bitcoin mining facilities. And even though, yes, we're using more energy, we don't have to think in these zero-sum games. Using more energy does not mean it's worse for the planet. We're using more energy. We're reducing the waste associated with that energy infrastructure that was going to be wasted because the whole town was going to have to, they had too much. And so we fill that gap. And instead of them having to start from scratch, we just help fill that gap, plug that hole, help make electricity cheaper, help make the people's lives there better, bring a few more jobs, right? This is the point of non-zero sum thinking, right? And this is the beauty of Bitcoin. And my point is saying, if you want to buy Bitcoin to see Bitcoin price go up, this is something really important to keep in mind. $60 trillion are invested in these ESG funds, and they have been closed off 100% to Bitcoin for years because the narrative was Bitcoin's going to boil the oceans. Literally, that was the narrative, and that it was going to, destroy the world and, make Earth, a living desert or whatever, right? My point is that while that's a very small narrative shift for now from a reputable, or in their eyes, a reputable organization like the IPCC, the reality is the narrative is changing. The fear, uncertainty, and doubt are changing. They're collapsing to zero. And the reality is once that narrative changes, we do not know to what degree they're going to begin investing in Bitcoin. Maybe it's a 1% allocation, maybe it's a 0.1% allocation, but if you have a $60 trillion market versus an entire asset worth 1.3 trillion, with all of the coins left on spot market being barely $200 billion, you compare 200 billion to 60 trillion, and all of a sudden you can just deal with a 0.1% allocation to start making a very, very big difference in Bitcoin. Now, like I described before, Vladimir Putin himself has pivoted on his anti-Bitcoin stance. Obviously, Russia at one point was extremely hostile to Bitcoin, but now Putin has had a more positive Bitcoin standing, personally describing Bitcoin to potentially be used in trade, in particular for Russia's oil. Now, again, whenever I talk about politicians, people say, oh, Luke, you're blindly, agreeing with them and trusting them and saying that they're morally virtuous, right? Again, my point is not saying that these politicians necessarily should be trusted with their words and definitely not with their actions. My point is saying these are influential people, right? Hamas is a very famous terrorist organization. Am I condoning their actions? Absolutely not. Vladimir Putin is one of the world's richest people, one of the world's most powerful people. Am I condoning what he's done? No, absolutely not. My point is that these are powerful people, and the whole idea of Bitcoin is digital chess, which I'll get to more in a moment. The whole idea of Bitcoin is digital chess is it is a playing board, it is a game board that is open for everyone. Okay, Bitcoin is the game at which all the enemies are going to be able to fight upon, and therefore the board itself is worth a lot more than what it's currently worth right now. You can buy one square on this chessboard for a mere $71,000. It's extremely, extremely cheap, and I'll get to that, like I said, more in a minute. Now let's get back to the list here. There are less than 5.86% of all Bitcoin left to be purchased, left to be mined. I should have said mined, or I should have said issued, not purchased, because this 5.86% is really, that's the issuance I was talking about. Less than 6% of all the Bitcoin left are to be issued within 10 years. Over 99% of all the Bitcoin will have been issued. Now, there are currently 2 billion people who remain unbanked, effectively unplugged from the global economy. And to bank these people would be to increase the contributing adult population by 60%, right? And so this is something that I think is interesting. A lot of people talk about. They say, oh, AI is going to increase human productivity so much. Oh, humanoid robots are going to increase human productivity so much. And they're not wrong, right? Both of those things are definitely going to. But even before we get there, we have other human beings to think about, right? Yeah, sure, maybe AI is going to double human capacity. Maybe humanoid robots will also double human capacity, right? In the manual world versus the digital world. But just the humans themselves, 2 billion people don't have bank accounts. They can't contribute to the world economy, right? These are people that make less than $15 to $20 a day in cash. So they save it, they can inherently never save more money than what they can keep in cash safely in their bank account that doesn't get robbed, right? Their entire net worths are mere hundreds, if not, single-digit thousands of dollars, right? This is billions of people that don't have access to the stock market, that don't have access to the banking system, that don't have access to international global economic trade, right? And my point is, you should be excited about Bitcoin banking these unbanked, because even before we can have the conversation about AI and humanoid robots increasing human productivity, we have to keep in mind the human population is going to grow by another 25% in the coming decades, from 8 billion to 10 billion, number one. And we can increase the number of adults plugged into the global economy by over 60% just by giving them bank accounts where they have the ability to save capital more than just, handfuls of cash in their home, and where they can transact with people internationally, right? You can't do international transfers if you don't have a bank account. You can't save for your children or your grandchildren if you don't have a bank account, right? And this is my point. This is the beautiful thing. And it's also important to keep in mind, billions of people that do have bank accounts live in nations where there is significant inflation. So while they technically might have a bank account, they are still getting robbed every single year, every single decade of their funds, right? There are billions of people that don't have bank accounts. There are billions of people that do have bank accounts in a high inflation, high debasement currency system. And then we have, the sub 1 billion people that are blessed enough and fortunate enough to be living in America, Canada, Europe, Australia, etc., that are Western nations where they actually have bank accounts and they actually don't have a currency that's depreciating at 20% a year, just 5 or 6% a year or whatever, right? So this is an exciting thing to keep in mind. Everything else I have said in this video before this is perhaps one of the most exciting, the most bullish things in all these things, because up to this point in the video, I've been talking about reallocations from within the system, a $60 trillion ESG reallocation within the system, pension fund reallocations within the system, political currency reallocations within the system, Microsoft and other megacorp reallocations within the system. This what I'm talking about with new adults is an addition to the system. We have less in common with the near future than the past. We are going to have more change to banking the unbanked in the next 40 years than the previous 4,000 years combined. It's a really, really big deal. Okay, this is the first thing we're looking at here that's going to actually increase the global economy and productivity system, right? Now, let's change it up a bit to something a little more pessimistic. In the United States, back in the US, Medicare will soon become insolvent. As soon as 2026, it will begin to become insolvent. That's something important to keep in mind. And going on that trend of America's insolvency, we've surpassed $35 trillion of national debt, adding a few $100 billion a week. And we are on track right now for $70 trillion within a decade, okay? Assuming no new wars, no new recessions, and no new other economic stimulus events, we're going to hit 70 trillion. We're going to double in a decade or slightly before. It depends on your math and how long your time horizon is, right? Different time frames in America's history have different compound growth rates for the debt. So whatever the case, 70 trillion in approximately a decade. Likewise, we have over $250 billion in unfunded liabilities here in the United States. And therefore, the United States is on track to hit $1 quadrillion in unfunded liabilities within a generation. Again, this is assuming no new wars, no new recessions, and no new entitlement programs, right? And unfortunately, I hate to say this because I'm an optimist, but I think we are going to have more wars. I think we are going to have more entitlement programs. And I think we are going to have especially more and more recessions and requirements for bailing out the big banks and bailing out major assets, right? This is my point. We don't know how high the debt is going to go. We don't know how high unfunded liabilities are going to go, but we do know the trend is up. Even at current rates, it's amounts of money that are incredibly unimaginable to us, and probably it compounds even more than we think it's going to, right? If you told somebody in the late 1700s or the 1800s, we'd be talking about in terms of billions and trillions, they would not have believed you, because back in that day, people talked about the national debt, people talked about major companies in terms of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, maybe tens of millions of dollars. The entire national debt of the United States was under $50 million at one point. The entire Louisiana Purchase was way less than $50 million. Okay, we purchased Alaska for $7 million. My point is that as we continue to debase the dollar, we go from million to billion to trillion, and we're soon approaching to begin talking about the quadrillion dollar level. So just something to think about, okay? That's important to keep in mind. In nominal terms, we're going to continue to debase perpetually. Now, probably an equally, if not more important context here is this, okay? 98%, okay? Not 5%, not 30%, not 50%, not 80%, 98% of nation states that surpass 130% sovereign debt to GDP have hyperinflation, default, or war within 15 years, okay? The United States Treasury, okay? Our own government, okay? Not Luke Broyles, the conspiracy theorist, not some random person on Reddit, okay? The United States itself, the United States Treasury itself, doing their own math, their own internal studies, where they have an incentive to make themselves look good, okay? That organization, America itself, has projected America's sovereign debt to GDP to surpass over 690% at current rates, assuming linear growth. We know we are not going to stay at current rates, or at least we have we don't know, actually, I guess, think in probabilities, right? There is a very high probability We will not stay at current rates because we will always have more wars and more reasons for more government spending. Okay. And we are very confident it's not going to be linear growth. It's going to be exponential growth because when you have a percentage of interest on sovereign bonds, that's inherently an exponential function, not a linear one, right? And so my point is not me being a doomsdayer, but the United States Treasury itself, assuming no new spending and assuming linear growth, is still over 690% compared to a 98% track record for the 130% scenarios, right? So my point is, this is not sustainable, right? When do I think things really start to hit ahead? I think things are really start hitting ahead in the late 2030s, maybe early 2040s, right? I don't think that the dollar is going anywhere anytime soon. I think the dollar is going to stay around. I think the banking system is going to stay around. Obviously, there are hundreds of countries outside of the United States that would have their currencies fall in value before the United States. I think actually the most bullish thing, the most optimistic thing for the US dollar would be if we have hyperinflations or defaults in other countries around the world, because those defaults, those hyperinflations will then cause demand to go back to the US dollar. But my point is, even the US dollar, which is, the escape hatch for all the other political currencies, even the US dollar is on, in my opinion, pretty shaky ground, especially considering this, right? Our demographics and everything else that I'm mentioning. So I really got to keep up the speed here. So let's go through some numbers and math. If Bitcoin were to become 7%, not 30%, not 50%, not 90%, not even 10%, 7%. Bitcoin would be 7% of global assets, not next year, not next decade, but by 2045, that would be a price per Bitcoin of 13 million bucks per Bitcoin in today's dollars. That's really important to keep in mind. In today's dollars, okay? Now, we adjust that for inflation in 2045. We assume a 7% monetary expansion rate, which has been the trend over the last 20 years of the US dollar. That means that the price for Bitcoin would have to be adjusted upwards from 13 million up to 58.3 million per Bitcoin in nominal USD price in the year 2045, right? So what is reality? Maybe somewhere in between, right? Obviously, assuming we don't print more than 7% a year, right? But my point is, this would still keep Bitcoin at a 7% allocation of global assets in 2045, right? And so even though Bitcoin has increased in price by a factor of 100,000x in the last 15 years, okay, despite only, and very conservatively, very optimistically, 0.1% of the world using the network, right? In reality, I'm rounding down. This was not a 100,000x in the last decade and a half. That was more like 130, 150,000x, something like that. So I'm rounding down when it comes to returns, and I'm rounding way up when it comes to 0.1%. I think it's half of that, maybe even a third of that, right? My point is, even though Bitcoin increased by a factor of 100,000x in the last 15 years, with best case 1 in 1,000 people using Bitcoin, reality is that for this scenario of Bitcoin going to $58 million over the course of the next 2 decades, that would be a nominal price increase of 883x. Okay, now at the time of writing, Bitcoin price was $66,000, right? Obviously, as I showed at the beginning of this video, Bitcoin price is now $72,000. So Bitcoin's already up like basically 10% since I made this made this thread a few days ago, right? But my point is that this would be roughly less than 1% of the total nominal returns thus far for Bitcoin the asset, despite a 40% longer timeline and a theoretical upper limit of 1,000x in global adoption for a mere single-digit percentage of global assets, right? We've had a 100,000x in the last 15 years. We are looking at, again, these are assumptions. These are if-then statements. These are not predictions. But if that were to happen, that would be logically consistent with diminishing returns, because it would be less than 1% of the returns, right? An 883x versus a 100,000x be less than 1% of the returns in a much longer timeline, right? A 21-year timeline, not a 15-year timeline, right? And even then, we're still talking about single-digit percentage exposure to global assets, right? So if we put it in other words, even with diminishing returns, extended timelines, single-digit monetary expansion, and single-digit global allocation, we still achieve a multi-decade million-dollar Bitcoin within decades. If this assumption holds true, that means someone starting from $0 today that buys $10 worth of Bitcoin every day for the next 21 years is going to end up with approximately $27.89 million in nominal, and that's important, nominal asset value, right? In real terms, that'd be much, much less, more like 6 million or so, right? And my point is that that's not a prediction. That's all if-then statements. If Bitcoin hits X percentage by Y year, and with all these assumptions, I'm making these assumptions very clear in this thread here, so then you can have your own conclusions, okay? My point is that even with just $10 a day in Bitcoin, that could be multiple seven-figure net worth in a couple decades, right? Maybe you don't want to wait a couple decades. Okay, well then fine, go gamble the lottery or do whatever you want to do, right? But if your time horizon is a couple decades, and if you're starting from zero and starting with just a few bucks a day, that could add up to something substantial if your time horizon is long enough. That's my point. Get off zero. I'm not saying go all in. I'm saying just get off zero. Buy $10. Okay, $10 worth of Bitcoin and wait for a long period of time, right? Obviously, if you don't want to wait 21 years, buy way more than $10, right? It's all down to your personal time horizon, right? Now, what do prices do? Prices fall to the marginal cost of production, which causes deflation, okay? However, our own self-interest results in larger incentives to produce more currency units to redistribute said energy production, right? Okay, now this is really important. What am I talking about here? I am describing the reality of how these economics work, right? We have technology forcing prices down, and we have inflation forcing nominal prices up. And the beauty of Bitcoin is that you get to enjoy all the returns, the technological returns of the global economy, while also opting out of the political currency system, right? And so that is the beautiful thing here that we're looking at. Give me 1 second. I need to message somebody. Okay, message complete. Now let's get back to the video message here. So what is the next thing on our list here? It has to do not with prices falling to the marginal cost of production. It has to do with something else. If I can pull it up right here. Please like this video and subscribe if you don't mind. If you have not yet, it means a lot because these videos take a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of energy from my brain and from my vocal cords and everything else. But, again, I'm trying to have everything in one concise video because a lot of you are sitting on the sidelines, or a lot of you are trying to help your family members or loved ones stop sitting on the sidelines. And so I'm just trying to compile everything together to get you to understand that $70,000 per Bitcoin is stupid dirt cheap, right? That's my point. That's why I'm trying to make this video. I'm begging you to get off zero, right? Just get some exposure to it, right? So, okay, let's get back to the thing here. Okay, so I was describing how prices fall to marginal cost of production. Okay, now Bitcoin is the tool to prevent human redistribution of currency via brute force electrical cost. What does that mean? That means in 2022, when we successfully deflected the trajectory of an asteroid, we still don't know how to shut down Bitcoin. We know how to stop an asteroid. We have the technology to stop an asteroid. And if faced with a large enough threat, we could put together a coalition to move the trajectory of an asteroid. If you don't believe me, we literally did it in 2022, right? Now, the only successful attack against Bitcoin that we know of, that I know of, okay, with current technology, would require a permanent global destruction of both the internet and radio communication systems, okay? It's a non-zero chance. We got to think in probabilities. There is some percentage that the world ends. There is some percentage that we go back to a Mad Max hyper-apocalypse of centuries ago, right? That is a non-zero chance. However, that scenario where there is that non-zero chance is in of itself worthless because guns and bullets are the only new commodity worth having. I often joke that the only two investments that make sense anymore are Bitcoin if you're the optimist, and then, seeds, gasoline, bullets, and guns, and all that kind of stuff if you're a pessimist, right? And everything else in the middle kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. Either it's going to become irrelevant because we're going to go backwards and have some sort of, technological apocalypse, or we're going to go forwards and the new technology will make the current technology obsolete, right? Everything else is in the middle of these two paradigms. Every other investable asset with monetary premium is somewhere in the world, right? Now, the compound annual growth rate of the Bitcoin network thus far in terms of adopters is approximately 80%, just over 80% faster than the internet at similar adoption phases, okay? Now, what that means is at current rates, Bitcoin would cause a similar amount of change in half the time. And so all of these factors, all of these things that I've described, all of these, okay, again, I'm not saying all these things are going to, manifest in the next few months, in the next few years even. I'm saying there's so many catalysts coming. And, if you're ignoring these, like what happens if 2 of these things come true? What happens if 5 of these things, 10 of these things come true? That is massive catalyst upwards. So given this information, and specifically that of the internet, here are 2 brief series of questions as we wrap up this video. Number 1, if I told you in the year 1997 that the internet was not only as valuable as every television, newspaper, and post office in the world, but it would create approximately 70 million times more data, would you have believed me? Personally, I doubt it. And the reason I doubt it is because I would have not believed myself either, right? This is not about who is smarter. This is about who is the better visionary, right? You can be very smart. You can be very educated. You can have a lot of letters on the end of your name and a lot of diplomas on the wall. But if you don't have the vision to conceptualize this future technology and the insight to determine what future technologies and visions are bunk and which ones are legitimate, if you don't have that discernment, then you're going to be caught blindsided when these new technologies come down the line, right? Many people were not bullish enough on the internet. Many people were not optimistic enough on the internet. Some people were optimistic on the internet, but optimistic in the wrong ways, and they lost a lot of money in the process. The hard part is being the visionary to see that properly. And I, obsess about doing everything I can, do the best I can to, try to picture that future. So another question. If I told you in the same year, 1997, that quote unquote, all other communication platforms will trend towards zero against the internet, would you have believed me? If I told you that every single company within 30 years would have been an internet company, would you have believed me? Probably not. If I told you right now in the year 2024 that we are still only at a 60 to 65% adoption of the internet and that you are not too late to the internet, would you believe me? Obviously, I'm saying these things in parallel to Bitcoin, okay? In a few decades, people are going to look back and say, wow, if you had told me in 2024 that the Bitcoin communication network was worth more than all the other monetary networks, I would not have believed you. And if you told me that every company in the future is going to be a Bitcoin company, I would not have believed you. And if you told me, let's say 30 years from now, that we're still only at 50, 60, 70% adoption for Bitcoin, it's going to be very hard to believe, right? So let's get back to Bitcoin. If I told you that what digital communication, internet, did to analog communication, like newspapers, is akin to what digital capital, Bitcoin, will do to all physical and political forms of capital, physical meaning like gold and real estate and stocks, political forms of capital being like political currency. Okay, if I told you that, would you believe me? If I told you that Bitcoin was less likely to go to zero than every other asset in the world trending to zero against Bitcoin, would you believe me? And if I told you to buy Bitcoin because I care about you, I want to see you succeed and help protect you along the rapid political currency debasement trend, okay, would you believe me, right? You may believe me in word, but you may not be believing me in action. Do you still have cash on the sideline? Are you still waiting to buy Bitcoin? Are you still twiddling your thumbs waiting for Bitcoin to get back down to that level where you can justify buying? Okay, then you don't believe me. You might believe me in word, but not in action. If you actually believe me in action, and you actually believe these things that I'm describing in action, I've been talking about well over an hour now. If you actually believe these things, put your money where your mouth is and get into the Bitcoin standard, get off zero and get some allocation to it, and stop waiting on the sidelines, crossing your fingers, we're going to go down, okay? Because we may not go down. Think in probabilities. The probability Bitcoin's going to double from here are way higher at this point than the probability of the dollar doubling, aka Bitcoin falling by half, right? You've got to think in terms of probabilities. So, action item. In the same way, I am begging you, I am encouraging you to get off zero when it comes to Bitcoin allocation. My encouragement is to get off zero when it comes to your self-custody as well, okay? Get off zero Bitcoin, right? Get off 0.000 Bitcoin, okay? 30 years ago, we couldn't possibly articulate how different the internet would change the world. And likewise, I find it difficult to explain how much Bitcoin will change the world in the next 21 years, right? Again, Bitcoin is changing the world 83% faster annually than the internet, right? So the writing is on the wall, as they say. The world is accelerating, and Bitcoin remaining as a niche will become increasingly absurd, just as the internet now being regarded as niche is absurd, right? So you can book a call with me if you want to talk about how to buy Bitcoin, if you're brand new to Bitcoin. If you've been in Bitcoin a while, but you're looking to increase the security of your Bitcoin self-custody setup, feel free to book a call with me. You can find the link in the description of this video, in the comment section, and in the description. I highly encourage you to do so, okay? My calendar is pretty full. It's not totally full, but it is going to be increasingly full as more and more people, for all these reasons above, begin to come to Bitcoin, okay? The only thing scarcer than Bitcoin is a service provider in Bitcoin. My team at the Bitcoin Advisor with 40 people, very happy and proud of the team. I was the first American at the Bitcoin Advisor, so I was the first one. I've been, encouraging many, many people, hundreds of people over time to do this, right? So if you don't want to book a meeting directly, you can text the phone number you see on the screen, quote unquote, free Bitcoin chess. And I will personally send you some Bitcoin via one of my favorite companies in all of Bitcoin called River. They just announced a wonderful, high interest rate product for cash reserves. They are FDIC insured. Lots of wonderful things. Please in the description below. Either book a meeting with me as soon as possible. If you're looking to buy more Bitcoin, if you are debating how to buy more Bitcoin, I'm more than happy to help you. My job at the Bitcoin Advisor is help people buy more Bitcoin, whether that's, sell other assets to buy Bitcoin, if that's to increase their dollar cost averaging, whether that's finding the proper ways to take out reasonable, logical, low risk debt to buy Bitcoin, all of those things. My average client at the Bitcoin Advisor increases their Bitcoin stack by 51.2% within the first 12 months. I was helping people yesterday. I'm going to help some people today after I finish this video at some point. All the time. My point is, how do we help you buy more Bitcoin? You pay me to help you buy more Bitcoin. The fastest way to help you buy more Bitcoin is to lower the risk with your portfolio. The faster you lower that risk, the greater you can tolerate a higher allocation to Bitcoin, the greater you can tolerate a higher risk tolerance to Bitcoin, right? If your spouse is having trouble understanding Bitcoin, if your spouse is not fully convinced on Bitcoin, if you have family members, a business partner, a church, or something in your life that you want to see them buy more Bitcoin, book a call with me, link in the description, or text the phone number on the screen, free Bitcoin chess, as well as your email address, and I will personally send you some Bitcoin. So don't put your email address in the chat in the description below. That's not, don't put it publicly, but text this phone number, your name and your email if you want me to reach out to you. I will send you free Bitcoin for my own personal stack. As a thank you, I'll send you a few hundred or a few thousand sats as a thank you for watching this video, watching as far as you did. That means a lot to me. Or you can book a call with me directly before my calendar fills up. So, concluding metaphor to this long mess rambling video, electricity is the physical wood you turn into a chessboard. Computers are the binary black and white paint you put on top of the chessboard. The internet is the assortment of chess pieces, right? The internet is the rook, the internet is the queen, the internet is the pawn. Bitcoin is the set of rules of the game itself. Bitcoin describes how we leverage the pieces of communication, how we leverage the chess pieces on top of the computer circuit board built on the foundation of electricity, right? That is what Bitcoin is. We have built our whole world on top of this tangible thing, electricity, that we have converted through computers into a board, bits with 1 and 0, black and white, right? Into a board that now we can communicate specific things to each other across space and time atop of the paint. And Bitcoin itself is the rule book describing how we move those things, right? Bitcoin is the economic incentive and system to have everyone aligned on how to communicate with each other built atop these foundations. You couldn't have the set of rules for chess until you had the chess pieces. You couldn't have the chess pieces until you had the board. You couldn't have the board until you have the wood to make the board, right? This is the series of technological progress we have had in the last century. So this is exactly what we have seen. This makes perfect sense, right? You need the board, the squares, and the pieces, but only once the rules and objectives of gameplay are set does the actual change happen. We have less in common with the near future than the ancient past. Bitcoin is the key to unlock all of the progress of these things, right? We have progressed a lot over the last century from a technological perspective, but actually having the rules of the game itself, we actually, for the first time, have a consistent monetary quote-unquote game that the whole world is aligned on with Bitcoin, right? So all technology last century has been building up to this point, and Bitcoin is the set of economic rules to accelerate gameplay, okay, which is productivity, right? In the old, now, I guess to kind of hit it home or more tangible, right? What has been the game so far? While we have been building the electric grid, while we have been building computers, and while we have been building the internet, the whole game this far has been, how do we get as close to the money printer as possible and hoard productive assets, hoard corporate stock, hoard gold, hoard real estate, right? That has been the old game. In order to collect more political currency units, to get as high of an allocation exposure, not to cash, but to cash flows as possible before the cash itself devalues. That is the old game. That is what we've been sitting upon in various different iterations and cycles for thousands of years. The new game, the new question is, how do we build as much stuff as possible and print as much paper as possible and distribute as quickly as possible to acquire Bitcoin? Okay, we're trending from a zero-sum old game into a non-zero-sum new game, okay? Everything to this point has been pre-game. As quick as the world has felt for you, as quick as the world has changed between you, your parents, and your grandparents, that is going to be dwarfed by the rate of change in the future. The soft war of digital chess is approaching, hyperdeflation is the future, and Bitcoin is rapidly pricing that into the future. Okay, you will see Bitcoin prices skyrocket, right? You will see it in nominal terms rise dramatically in terms of the US dollar because everything trends towards zero against Bitcoin. In the same way that everything goes up forever in terms of the US dollar because the dollar is an inflationary currency system, In terms of Bitcoin, everything trends to zero because Bitcoin is the opposite of that. It is a deflationary currency system. Okay, that is the reality that we're looking at here. Yes, Bitcoin's going up in terms of the US dollar. Most people that are nearer to Bitcoin see Bitcoin as a number go up thing. They don't understand it as a number go down thing. But my point is that life will get better and better for those like you that embrace the nonviolent digital economic competition that is 21st century chess, Bitcoin. Right now, everybody is playing a different game somewhere else out in the world. Everyone's making up their own rules. Everyone has their own chessboards. They're all making up their own rules, and it's chaotic. It's destructive. People are flipping their tables over and flipping their boards over because eventually, at some point, when nobody agrees on the rules, they just have to resort back to fistfights. But in Bitcoin chess, every single user that's coming to the game is increasing the size of the board, increasing the complexity of the board, and that is the new system that we have. My voice is going out. I'm going to finish up here really quickly because my voice box is about out. So it's exciting, but it's also concerning. We have less in common with the near future than the ancient past. Both the good things and the bad things, both the righteous things and the evil things. Change is coming, change is accelerating, and most are not prepared. So I don't know what the future has. I don't know when the future is going to get here, but my encouragement is get some Bitcoin and protect the economic purchasing power of your children's time before it falls 99% in terms of Bitcoin. So TikTok, you are in check. You got to make a move. All right. We have this little picture here of the chess grandmaster himself, showing us how it's done. So that is the video today. That is the encouragement. The big motivation more than anything is just get off zero, get some Bitcoin. If you have not yet taken your Bitcoin self-custody seriously, if you're still procrastinating this, if you are still in Bitcoin exchanges, if you still have a 100% allocation to single sig devices, especially if you have more than half of a Bitcoin or 2/3 of a Bitcoin, please, please, please reach out. You can find in the description below where you can book a call with me or text that phone number on the screen that you saw earlier, free Bitcoin chess, and I will know that you saw this video. I'll be more than happy to talk to you and get as much progress as possible because my job is to help people buy Bitcoin, but a lot of people have been putting this off. And last night and this morning, a lot of people were texting me realizing that, oh, actually, it's easier for you to help me buy more Bitcoin when Bitcoin's cheaper. So don't procrastinate this. Don't put it off. Please book a meeting in the link in the description below, or you can text the phone number on the screen. I'll throw that back on the screen one more time here as we finish up with Mr. Mike himself. Telling you it is your move. This is your move. This is your life. This is your time. There is no tomorrow. There is only today. There is only the present. If you're procrastinating buying Bitcoin, if you're procrastinating taking your Bitcoin self-custody seriously to tomorrow, news is tomorrow never arrives. So either you will take self-custody and you will do Bitcoin stuff now, or you'll be forced to lose your capital. So it is your move. Time is not on your side, okay? Text the phone number on the screen or book a call in the link in the description below. That's all I have. Please like and subscribe to this video. I did this all in one take to get it out as quickly as possible. I really appreciate it. This is not easy to do. It's very time consuming and my voice box is about to go out. So goodbye, everyone. Thank you. Like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.